Have you heard of leaky gut syndrome before? Maybe you've heard of leaky lung, leaky brain. Maybe you don't know what all this leaking is about, but you're suffering with digestive problems and with brain fog. We're going to discuss all this today and give you some good understanding of how this works, what it is, and the things you can do to actually help reverse this quite simply and quite easily. Hey guys, I'm Trevor Chakuti here from SpineWise, and we're going to have a good chat to you today about the effects of leaky membranes on your system and what you may be able to do to get it under control. So let's have a quick look at this and have a quick deep dive into this area today. So number one, the question is, are you leaking to begin with? Do you know that you have a leaky system? Because a majority of people actually don't, and it is really, really common. So let me explain what it is. So along your membranes, you actually have a protective mechanism that sits between your gut and your bloodstream that acts as a filter that allows things to move through that need to and blocks other things that shouldn't. And this acts as a barrier to your system. Then we have a backup plan in case all that goes wrong between your blood supply or your vascular system and all your vital organs to again protect them in case anything goes wrong. And this is really what we're looking at. This is a failure in this system. So when you have a failure in this system, we can start having things move all over the place, and this creates a whole lot of havoc for our bodies. One of the biggest issues that believe may be associated with this is when you start having things leak into the bloodstream on a regular basis, the only way we can remove them really is to filter them out through the liver and the kidney, but quite often these chains of proteins or peptides are too big to be removed from these substances. So what has to happen is that your actual immune system needs to fight it off. And this can be a problem. Let me explain why. So let's give us, rather than using proteins and the like, let's just give them a series of numbers. So let's say we got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Let's say that's our protein chain, 1 to 7, okay? We have a very long protein chain, but our immune cells are actually quite small. They can only handle 3 amino acids. So when they go and attack and try and break this down, they can't attack the whole thing. They look for a weak point along that chain, and they attack 3. So let's say in this situation they attack 3, 4, 5. Now what we really have when it attacks 3, 4, 5 like that is a very small sequence of amino acids. Now the big problem with that is, what's the chance of 3, 4, 5, that amino acid sequence, that 3, 4, 5 occurring in something else in nature? Pretty high. Hey, it could be in a different food, but more importantly, it could also be inside one of your own tissues. So let's say this protein chain is a virus and it's gotten into your bloodstream. Once it gets in there, the immune system goes after it, it attacks 3, 4, 5, breaks it apart, breaks it into several parts of it, and now we have immune cells programmed to 3, 4, 5. Let's say this is a food chain. Let's say something like gluten, and the gluten's gotten into your bloodstream and gotten through those barrier systems, and now it's gone after 3, 4, 5. Now we have a problem that attacks gluten all the time. But let's say that we have another protein that comes through, which is 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. And let's say this is rice. Because it contains 3, 4, 5, this immune response also occurs with rice, not just gluten. We call this reaction molecular mimicry, and this is a really, really important topic, which is probably a bit too big to get through here and now with our barrier system, but I want to understand why this barrier system is so incredibly important. Let's say 3, 4, 5 occurs in another tissue like your thyroid. Now the immune system starts targeting your thyroid and starts attacking it. This is what we call Hashimoto's. Let's say it goes after your gut, your large intestine or your small intestine, and 3, 4, 5 is in there. Now what we're talking about is something like celiac disease. So maintaining our barriers is really important, not just for the way we heal and the way we feel, but also in terms of helping to keep the immune system under control so we don't go haywire and we don't end up in a situation where our immune system attacks us. So what are the early symptoms that we often see with people who have breakdowns in their barrier protection system, which is what we're talking about here? So the most common one we hear with people who have leaky brain is that because they get this inflammatory process going through the brain, they end up with brain fog. That's one of the biggest telltale signs that we're having breakdown of our blood-brain barrier, is brain fog, a lack of clarity and an inability to think on the spot, like everything becomes difficult. And it's a very common symptom of people who have a leaky brain. If it gets into the lung, we have a breakdown of our lung barriers. Often we have fluid move from our arteries into the lungs, And as they go into the lungs, this creates this fluid deposition and this recurrent type cough. And this recurrent cough can again create issues right through our system. Really, really common thing again that we pick up. We've got to be careful with it though, because reflux can create very similar coughing patterns, but this is one of the common ones as well. And then the gut. There's a whole lot of different things that can go with gut issues. But one of the biggest ones that we see with the gut issues is bloating. And it may not be just a small kind of bloating. In some people, when you have even just a little bit, it'll give you this whole big bloating feeling like you've been 9 months pregnant type feeling. You've got to undo your genes type thing. So this is another common one as well. So if we look at it from this perspective here, from a total human body perspective, when we start having this breakdown in our gut barriers, we start getting a leak into our arteries. That then starts flowing through our system, right through the entire body. All those proteins, we start getting immune responses to them. We start getting inflammatory process, and eventually this can start leaking into other organs. If there's a breach there, then we get immune responses inside those organs, and we have this cascade of events. So whilst this is kind of brushed over as just being, just a little leaky type of issue, realistically speaking, the leaky system is actually a really big problem for our future health. All right, so let's take a look a little bit more in depth. So here we have a cell membrane, and what we really have is a whole lot of foreign stuff that we don't want to get into our cells, and then a whole lot of stuff on the inside that do need to come out. We have this constant communication going backwards and forwards, up and down. So as we have this, we have little channels that occur, and these channels are what we can attach to, and when we attach to, this is what allows things to go through this membrane like that. When they leak, that system fails, falls down, and now even these bad guys can start finding their way into our system. And this is one of the common ways that things like viruses and bacteria and things like this get into our organs, is when we have a breakdown in this membrane. And these are the lipids that we can see here. And this leaky stuff, when they start moving through, the only way we can get rid of these guys then is to attack with our immune system and try and get rid of them and break them down. And that's really what we're referring to. Okay, so what is the causes of these? So there's a lot of different reasons that we can have a breakdown in our barrier system. We're going to go through just a few of the more important ones with this. So the first one is actually poor integrity. Okay, so what I mean by poor integrity, so when we talk about poor integrity, is in the structure itself can be poor. So in other words, all of these things, if we go back, these membranes are made up of all these good quality fats. So if we start having a high amount of hydrogenated fats, trans fats, rancid oils in our diet, we can actually start breaking down these membranes themselves, and all of a sudden now we have these spaces where they don't exist, and things can travel right through. So structural integrity is really, really, really important. So good quality fats in our diet become really critical in terms of regulating and keeping our barrier system healthy. Inflammation is the next biggest one. This is a real common cause of problems, and one of the most common reasons is chronic inflammation. And this can come from a couple of different reasons. We can get inflammation because we're having an accumulation of those foods that we're trying to break down, that 3, 4, 5, on our membranes. So therefore we have an immune response to it. So the immune system starts trying to attack it, break it down, kill it, and the result of that destruction that's occurring from the immune system is it actually creates localized inflammation. And this is important because if we go back to our cell structure, if we have inflammation occurring in this membrane, think of it as a balloon with little holes in it. So here's our balloon, and we have these couple of little holes. If we blow the balloon up and expand the balloon from this size to this size, our holes go from small to much larger. And the same thing happens with our membrane. If we have inflammation and the membrane gets stretched, we start having these little gaps that occur, which potentially once again allow for things to leak through. So having the immune system attack stuff that sits on the edge of our membranes can create this inflammatory response and actually create all these issues as well. So we need to be very mindful of that. The other big cause of inflammation, of course, is diet. And we've already touched on the need for good quality fats in our diet. The other big thing with that as well is high amounts of pro-inflammatory foods such as carbohydrates and refined sugars. that can drive this whole process and create that inflammatory response as well. We've got other little things that can do this too in some people. So things like electromagnetic frequencies can potentially create some issues in some people. And final one that I want to talk about is biochemistry. And biochemistry is a really, really big problem. So what we understand is that we have these little protein chains called metallothioneins, which you'll often see abbreviated as MT. And these metallothioneins are proteins that go and actually start creating and structuring that membrane and that barrier system to begin with. So when we get a decrease in the availability of these metallothioneins, we can't create and repair and restore this structural integrity back, and this can create further problems with the entire barrier system. And this is a real common one that we have for people who have blood-brain barrier breaches, especially when we remember that the blood-brain barrier is thinnest over our temporal lobe and over our cerebellum. And these are the two areas that are quite commonly affected, amongst others, but commonly affected with things like autism and various other disorders as well. So really, really critical element. Now, when we look at metallothionein, it's a very interesting product, because when we look at metallothionein, we really have these 5 fingers that come off it. And these 5 fingers really are developed or produced with zinc in mind. So the zinc is the main molecule that goes through and actually produces this metallothionein protein. The interesting thing about it though is that metallothionein actually has an affinity. It prefers over zinc things such as cadmium, lead, silver, mercury, and copper. So whenever the metallothionein comes into contact with any of these metals, it drops its zinc, picks up these metals, and then transports it back to your liver. And this is one of the big ways that we remove heavy metals out of the brain if we happen to get exposed to it. So metallothionein, whilst building our blood-brain barrier in the first place, it's actually the backup plan to also remove it. So it's really, really important that we have this metallothionein functioning well. And metallothionein really is derived or gets utilized, starts getting produced and has a function in the human body once another substance called glutathione is actually being bound by about 30%. So once you've used up about 30% of your glutathione stores, metallothionein then becomes the active antioxidant and the active remover of a lot of these products from the human brain and the human body. So this is really important, because if we have low glutathione levels, which is a protein produced by your liver, if we have low glutathione levels, we start getting an increase in demand for metallothionein, and metallothionein is acting more as an antioxidant and more as a metal remover. Then all of a sudden we don't have enough of it to go around, and the result of that is we start getting breakdown in our barrier system again. So this is a real critical element. You can pick this up on your labs really, really, really simply. So if we understand that metallothionein has a greater affinity for copper than zinc, and copper is a vital mineral in the human body, then we can look at the ratio of the two of those to work out whether or not you're having an issue with metallothionein. So ideally what we want to see is that our copper levels are less than or equal to our zinc levels on lab tests. So if we get them assessed and your copper levels are 12, we should be seeing a zinc 12 or higher as well. Ideally about 80%, so 80 to 100% is ideally where we want to see. If we start dropping below 80%, then there's possibly a copper deficiency that's actually occurring. So this is a really big one that we can look at to track whether metallothionein is potentially being overutilized and burnt out. And it's also something to be aware of when we're looking at our labs, because we'll see a lot of people that see zinc that is low and then automatically presume that the problem is zinc deficiency, and that's not necessarily the case. It can be that your glutathione levels are low, liver function isn't great, and the net result of that is that you're using metallothionein up to make up for the lack of glutathione. So when we're looking at causes of barrier system breakdown, we can see that it's not as simple as it seems. There's actually a lot of things that can go on, and there's a lot more finer stuff as well. Even things like stress and sleep deprivation can be a common cause of it. So how do we go about correcting this? So the first thing we need to do is we need to remove the inflammation. Okay, we have to get rid of that. As I said before, the big ones are to remove all the irritants away to calm the immune system down. So look for our food sensitivities. The most common one that creates issues for most people is gluten. The other one that often we see as a problem is lactose. In some people, they have problems breaking down simple sugars, so things like mannose, fructose, and these type of sugars. And the result of that is it results in a SIBO reaction, which can also set off inflammation and a whole lot of other things. So dealing with these food sensitivities is really important. Dealing with potential infection, if we've got infection within the gut or within the system, that can drive that as well. And then also making sure we control our carbohydrate and our sugar intake is another big one at reducing the inflammation response. Improving our energy mechanisms, especially within the gut. The main energy mechanism that is really used in the gut by your cells is actually a saturated fat. And we think about it, and we've been told saturated fat is bad for everything over the years, including your gut. But what we know is the saturated fat, known as butyrate, is uptaked by your cells within the gut and used for energy production immediately. And if we don't have good enough and healthy enough supplies of butyrate in the gut, then the net result is we can't produce energy in the cells, and therefore we can't create new cells and maintain our function. The good thing about butyrate is that butyrate is easily and commonly found in fats such as ghee. So this is a real common one we can start using, is this fat called ghee, and ghee basically has about 4% of it as butyrate. So it's a really good source of that. The other really awesome thing is that, you know, when we desperately need things, the body tries to figure out a way. And one of the things we do know is that butyrate is made by a lot of your probiotics. So what we really want to do is feed those probiotics, and we use what we call resistant starch. That's the big one, not normal carbohydrate, resistant starch. And you can create resistant starch very, very easily simply by just taking rice, cooking it, and then refrigerating it overnight at about 4 degrees, which is the standard temperature for most refrigerators. And over 24 hours, it'll turn into resistant starch. And eating that pre-cooled rice, you can heat it up again, but eating that pre-cooled rice, where we've got this resistant starch now, will feed those probiotics and naturally increase your butyrate levels. Another one which works really, really well with that is pomegranate. Pomegranate works really well at feeding those same probiotics and getting butyrate up. So there's a lot of different things that we can do to get butyrate up. The other one we want to look at is the biochemistry, and we've already touched on that earlier when we spoke about the effect of liver function. We spoke about the effect of glutathione, and we spoke about that on metallothionein. And this interaction here, there's a few key nutrients that we know work really well. So the first one is N-acetylcysteine, which is a really good driver of glutathione. The mushroom cordyceps is another really good driver of glutathione. It can upregulate it quite effectively. The richest and the most functional source of glutathione directly is S-acetylglutathione, which you can get as a supplement as well, but it is very expensive, so NAC becomes very handy. Then the interaction and the recycling process that occurs from both of these is very much a selenium dependent action. So selenium can help with that as well. And then in metallothionein itself, what we're really looking at is vitamins A, vitamin C, vitamin E, and as we said before, zinc as well. So these are nutrients we can use to upregulate the production of metallothionein. But remember, we spoke about metallothionein. We need to be aware whether this is a general liver problem, whether this is a glutathione problem, whether this is a recycling problem, or whether this is a metallothionein problem. So these are things that you need to be careful of and be aware of, which we can work out during labs or in a clinical assessment. We can often discover that as well. And the final one, which is really, really critical for this, is you need to get sleep. Sleep is really critical at regenerating cellular tissues, especially within the brain itself. And we want to have 5 good sleep cycles, and I've done a whole lot of work. Jump onto our pages and you'll be able to find a whole lot of information about how you can track sleep and what you're really looking for if you're wearing a device that will track your sleep. And that can help you progress and tweak your sleep so that you can get it right, and we can help start getting all this under control. But rest assured, leaky gut, leaky brain, leaky lung, all these things are dealable. You can correct them. It takes a little bit of work, but sometimes a little bit of know-how and knowing where to find things and what to look for goes a long way in getting you back on your feet. Anyway guys, I'm Trevor Chakouti. If you've loved this video, please like and subscribe to our videos. Comment down below if you have any questions. I'm always here to help out. My team's here with you as well. If you want to come down and see us, please feel free to do so. Send me a message. I'm more than happy to help. You can reach us on Facebook as well if you like, if you want to connect to us directly. Otherwise, bye for now and I'll see you in the next vid. Catch you later.